have to get to see his actual house first of all. And that's also a very good chance to kind of see the life and times of Lincoln in Springfield, where he's going to live here for about 25 years, 17 of those years in this house from 1844 up until 1861. Now the house originally is built in 1839, so this is about a 179-year-old home you're going to be walking into. Alrighty folks, well, welcome to the parlor room first of all. Now this will be more of the guest entertainment room, if you will, back then. So you might notice that they're going to have some pretty fancy furniture items in here. So who do you think is usually not allowed on this side of the house back then? And the children. So Willie and Ted definitely won't be allowed in here back then, the youngest sons of the Lincoln family. Now for the most part, anything that has a black cover on these chairs or sofas, many of these furniture pieces do belong to the Lincolns. So Abraham Lincoln will definitely be sitting on one of those rocking chairs there. Mrs. Lincoln might be sitting over off to the side there. And then especially if there's a big party in this room, all these chairs and sofas would have been occupied by friends, work colleagues, and eventually political allies later on. Now the room itself can be split off into two separate sections. You'll have these big divider doors here, so you can close that off and have a front room for entertaining guests. Then this back area is usually Mr. Lincoln's private study, or sort of like a home office for him back then. That's also where the master bedroom used to be when it's still the one-story home. It's actually a one-story structure starting off. The Lincolns will eventually expand it to that two-story home in about 1855-56. That said, this is also going to be the same room that Abraham Lincoln will be told that he had just been picked by the Republican Party to run for president. So how would you folks react if somebody told you you're going to run for president? Yeah, no thank you. No. So yeah, it's very exciting, very nerve-wracking, very anxious time as well, because we'll have to remember he's part of the Republican Party at this time, which is going to try to stop the spread of slavery first, then later on will ultimately help pass the 13th Amendment in 1865, which does get rid of slavery in the United States. We also have to remember that during this meeting, his sons won't be allowed inside this room, again, especially Willie and Ted, but then who else is not allowed in here if we're talking about a big political meeting back then? And his wife. So Mrs. Lincoln will be sitting with her sons maybe in the dining room or maybe the sitting room across the way here. And maybe they were thinking about, well, you know, what's Dad going to say about this? What's Mr. Lincoln going to say about this? Or maybe in Willie and Tad's case, just, well, who the heck are these guys talking to Dad? Because trust me, the folks that showed up from Chicago, which is where the Republican convention was that year, they're going to be a little surprised themselves, because Lincoln wasn't necessarily the front runner going into this convention. The other big name was William Seward, who was a former governor and a former senator from New York. So it was a bit of a shock to the system that Lincoln beat out somebody like Seward, who had a lot more political experience at this point. But kind of fun to think about at the same time. But that said, folks, we'll make our way through the dining room next, and I'll meet you across the way in the sitting room. Oh, so that would actually be one of those abalone shells. So that's actually a gift given to Mrs. Lincoln by one of her friends that traveled to the Northwest at one point.
What are these books?
Those are actually, so I think those are actually kind of like Scottish kind of poetry and such back then. Lincoln's were very into Scottish literature and poetry at that time. So I think it's at least kind of collected volumes from that. So. So you might notice that they won't really have any major technology at this point. So no radios, no TVs, no Xboxes, no PlayStations, anything like that. But they do have a pretty fun gadget in this room. You'll have that box on the table there across the way. This will be known as the stereoscope. A few folks might remember those Viewmasters, little binocular view, that clicker on the side. That's going to be very similar to that older version of it, if you will. But you're going to grab one of those photo slides, put in the slide on top, look through the viewfinder, and you're actually able to see a 3D picture off this slide. So you're going to see things like pyramids from Egypt, things like Niagara Falls, or even other nature sites like forests and the like back then. And this is something that Willie and Sam will be fighting over especially. It'll be kind of their favorite toy down here. For Robert's case, the oldest son, he'll be sitting at that table or maybe that chair in the corner across the way. He's going to be reading quite a few books back then. A bit of a brainiac here. He's eventually going to go off to Harvard later on. For Mr. and Mrs. Lincoln's case, they'll be sitting in these rocking chairs, discussing different politics, different ideas in this room. In addition, for Mrs. Lincoln, she'll use the sewing table to her right here. She'll be patching up a lot of clothing for the Lincolns back then. Again, especially in Willie and Tad's case, being the troublemakers here, tearing up a lot of like shirts and pants and the like at that time. Then for Mr. Lincoln, especially during his downtime, he's going to be sprawled out right in front of that fireplace there, kind of where that little rug is now. Reading lots of books, reading lots of newspapers, playing with the family dog Fido perhaps. Then there's also a pretty good chance he's going to have a couple cats in this room as well. So again, I do apologize for dog people, but he's definitely a cat person. To the point that he actually had something like 1 to 6 cats in this house at a time back then. And he's also known for actually scooping cats right off the street, bringing to the house with him after work. So you got to imagine a few stray cats involved here. Then there's also a pretty good chance he just grabbed somebody else's cat too. He's a kind of fun guy with this as well. But after all that is said and done for the day, the family is eventually going to have to make their way upstairs to bed. So that's where we'll head upstairs to next, folks, up to Mr. Lincoln's bedroom. Now, as you make your way up the stairs, the railing itself is original to the home. So this is about as close as you can get to shaking Lincoln's hand nowadays. And it is the one artifact you can touch without me yelling at you or anything like that. So please grab it as much as you like, just don't break it. All right? Now, it's a French import design that Mrs. Lincoln would order. Now, she supposedly paid about $1,500 for this kind of wallpaper back then, which is pretty pricey at this time. For the house itself, it was actually about $1,200 starting off. So she actually paid a little bit more for this as most of the house. But it is kind of funny too, because they actually did find the old wallpaper still hanging on the south side wall here about 30 years ago. So by this point, it had actually been around for about 130 years. So that's actually pretty good for something like that. But I was also able to replicate that design for the rest of the room itself, and then more than likely it'll be in the room behind us as well. Because I guess I have 2 rooms for $1,500 sounds a lot better than 1 room with that, but you know, that kind of thing. But we also have to consider Mr. Lincoln will have a couple of unique artifacts in this room. Not to worry, that chamber pot's not actually his. It'd be kind of funny if it was, though. But you are going to have his wardrobe behind you here. That actually is one of his. He'll be standing there switching into everyday wear back then, lawyer outfits and such. Maybe occasionally like casual Friday suit as well. At least it'd be kind of fun to see his version of. Then we also have to think about him picking out his ties and socks over that dresser there. You know, maybe he had more than black or white socks. Maybe he had purple socks, as far as we know. Then we're also going to have one of his writing desks and chairs in the corner across the way here. Now, you have to imagine how I fitted that desk, first of all, because, I mean, I'm about 6'2", and I'd have a little trouble fitting there, whereas he was about 6'4". Then we also have to consider what he might have written at this desk. Maybe part of the House Divided speech might have been written here, at least maybe like a rough draft of it. Maybe notes on how to get back at Stephen A. Douglas during those Lincoln-Douglas debates of 1858. Then there's also a pretty good chance he's reading quite a bit of fan mail at this desk as well. One letter possibly being from a little girl named Grace Bedell from Westfield, New York. Has anybody heard of Grace Bedell before? Yeah, so what'd you get? That's the other beer.
She convinced him to grow whiskers.
Yeah, that's right, that's right. So she writes in October of 1860 and says, you know, if you grow your whiskers out, ladies really love the whiskers, and they'll be able to tease their husbands to vote for you, and you'll be president. So he's probably laughing at this at first, because, I mean, it's kind of a thing back then for politicians, and even nowadays, not a ton of them are going to have a bunch of facial hair, like beards or anything like that. So in a way, he's going to look like Henry Clay or Danny Webster up there, 2 pretty prominent politicians from this time. But then we also have to consider Mr. Lincoln does start growing that beard out right after he receives that letter in October of 1860. So he's going to have a bit of a goatee when he's elected president. Later on, as he makes his way over to the White House, he'll actually make a special stop in Westfield, New York, and actually get to meet the girl that convinced him to grow that beard out. So it's kind of a fun little monument, actually, if you do have a chance to see that. But it's going to be a little town right along Lake Erie there, that's kind of southwest corner of the state up there. So kind of fun to check out if you do have a chance. Now, that said, though, we'll also have to consider the second floor house laid out up here. You're going to have your guest room off to the side there. Outside on the landing will be more of a sewing room, although as I like to call it, a people watching station. Because this one, not a very good view of the neighborhood back then. shut up the blinds, they'd be able to sleep pretty well back then. At least I'd like to think so, because Mrs. Lincoln's room is connected to that back hallway as well, where the boys are going to be sleeping. So you can imagine at times, Willie and Tad especially are going to be a little bit rambunctious back then, so really rowdy kids at that time. So Mr. and Mrs. Lincoln definitely are going to be walking through here and trying to quiet them down and trying to get some sleep. But that's where we'll head over to next, folks, into the back hallway. So if you want to start checking in for the rooms back there, but then stop just before you head down the stairs, then just make sure we can try and do 2 lines as well, just so we don't all bottle up at the end. All right? The doors are closed up here. That one to your right is where the trunk room would have been. Now it's going to be like a big storage closet back then, but that'll be where you switch out your summer and winter clothing throughout the year. Then for this door behind me, this is where the linen closet used to be, though that's also the entrance for the loft space when it's still that 1-story home. Problem is for Lincoln, though, that is only about 6 feet of clearance in that loft back then, so he would have to duck a little bit. Again, he is about 6'4" back then. Now for the rooms that are open for us, this one to our right here is where the boys would sleep. Now starting off, that'll actually be Robert's room. Later on, he'll start using that guest room for a time, right before they leave for the White House. But in between that, this will officially become Willie and Tad's room. Unofficially their war room for tricks and pranks and world domination plans, I'm sure. Very well-known pranksters from this time. They were actually known for like shouting out the windows, "Vote for old Dave, vote for old Dave," as people are passing by in the street. And then of course Robert kind of pulls him to the side. It's like, "What are you doing? You're supposed to call your dad old." And Tad, of course, saying, "Well, what do you mean? He is actually old. What's the problem with that?" So kind of fun with that. They're also known for, when they make it to the White House, for actually setting up some kind of toll booth at the entrance. So they actually charge for people to go and see their dad, which is kind of awesome, actually. So kind of like a lemonade stand, but on a massive scale there for sure. Now, our other room will be to the left corner here. That'll be where the hired girl would sleep back then. Now, a hired girl is kind of a term for like a housemaid. That didn't mean a slave or anything like that. Though we do have to remember hired girls from a pretty diverse background, usually of African American, Portuguese, or Irish origins back then. She is going to be paid about $1.50 a week. So that actually is not too bad of a wage for back then. That's actually around $300 a week now. So again, not too bad of a wage for that time. But that does involve quite a few tasks, though, whether that's working the house, working the yard, working the barn, trying to figure out where Willie and Tad are at all times, because they're not just in the house or the neighborhood, they're like everywhere in Springfield back then. And I'm not saying they're the main reason for this, but the Lincolns were known for hiring at least 16 different hired girls during their 17 years here. So again, maybe not the main reason, but probably more than likely with that. But then she'll also be helping out Mrs. Lincoln downstairs in the kitchen. So you can imagine at times, Willie and Tad especially will wake up to things like eggs and bacon, biscuits and gravy, pancakes and sausage, and that kind of thing. Very good hearty foods for back then. But that's where we'll head down to next, folks, down to the kitchen. Pretty fun item down here, the stove itself. That actually is Mrs. Lincoln's stove there. Now this will be about as top of the line as you can get back then, but you're going to have a nice stove top and a warm tray in front, keeping hot plates hot. And you're also going to have an oven door on the side of the stove as well, where Mrs. Lincoln will be very well known for making a white almond cake back then, personal favorites of the Lincolns. It's also going to be more like an almond pound cake as well, so a little bit heavier, sort of denser cake with that. But we also have to remember that Mrs. Lincoln really likes this stove, to the point that she actually wanted to bring it to the White House with them when they leave in 1861. The issue, of course, is a cast iron stove, so this thing's really, really heavy. So you have to think about trying to get it out of the house, putting it onto a train to bring over to the White House, and eventually take it out of the White House, put back on a train, put back in here. So unfortunately for Mrs. Lincoln, she has talked out at the last minute with something like that, because that just wouldn't be possible, logistically speaking. But we also have to remember, for the family itself, things like chairs, tables, wardrobes, that kind of thing. Most of that is going to be left behind by the Lincolns, or if not sold out to neighborhood friends when they leave in 1861. So there at least was some kind of plan in place for the Lincolns to come back here, buy up new furniture, and then move back in following the presidency. Unfortunately, that just never really materialized. The family itself never actually came back to the house after they left in 1861. Now, it's still technically in the family until about 1887. You do have other folks renting for them up until about that time. Eventually, Robert will actually be the one that'll sell to the state that year. Then eventually the state of Illinois switched it over to National Park Service about 1972. But we also have to remember Robert is at least the one family member that we're pretty sure actually does come back to the house. But that's for a really brief visit, for if even an afternoon back then. And that would have been about September of 1909, that time around. But again, as far as we're aware, he's the only one that ever actually came back here. Now, in terms for Abraham Lincoln, though, we'll have to think about the size of the room down here as well. But you might be a little surprised, but this is actually about the same size as his birthplace home for Kentucky, that little log cabin he was born in. So like where we're standing over to that door there, it's roughly the same size as that cabin. But very remarkable to think that he's able to start off in a spot like this, build up into a very successful life just in Springfield alone, where he's going to, again, live here for about 25 years. He's going to be living in this house for about 17 of those, from 1844 up until 1861. This is where he's going to meet to marry his wife, Mary Todd. He's also going to have all 4 of his sons in Springfield, Robert, Eddie, Willie, and Ted. He'll become a very good father, family man, husband, very good local lawyer and politician. And he's also that guy who likes to pick cats off the street, too. So you got to remember that with him in Springfield, at least. Really was kind of an ordinary person. Had his own little quirks. Later on, does some very extraordinary things as President of the United States. And arguably becomes one of the greatest presidents the United States ever had, or maybe ever will have. But with that, folks, I want to thank you again for checking out Lincoln Home National Historic Site today. I hope you enjoyed the rest of your stay in Springfield. Thank you. But then also, too, we'll have to remember he's pretty popular around here. I'm pretty sure he's got his face on like every other building downtown. So pretty cool with that, though. But then we'll have a little step down here, folks, so watch yourselves.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Back in.
Thank you. Since you want to be more questions, what's it going? Yeah, you'll take minutes.
That's great, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, folks, well, that's kind of end of my bit. You have your exit behind that back corner there. Then if you do have a chance to check out that 3-seater outhouse, that's always a fun one. Nobody had to wait back then. So.